Sydney is entering what the New South Wales Premier has described as the critical few days, which will determine whether the city's lockdown will be extended. The 2-week shutdown is due to end at midnight on Friday, but a worrying number of new cases of the virulent Delta strain of COVID continue to be reported. Authorities are keeping a close eye on the outbreak at the Summit Aged Care Facility in Sydney's northwest.
Police have also questioned whether some Sydney-siders are flouting outdoor rules, while the state government has expressed dismay at reports of illegal gatherings. The NRL and police have both imposed hefty fines on a dozen St George players who attended a barbecue at Shell Harbour in breach of COVID restrictions, and 3 new infections are linked to a party at a hotel in the inner city suburb of Waterloo. Our reporter Lara Himes is there. She joins us now. Lara, good morning. So compliance is clearly an issue in this lockdown.
Good morning, Michael. Well, we're being told that generally Sydney-siders are adhering to the lockdown rules, but there are a couple of instances that could really prove quite costly for us. New South Wales Health issued an alert yesterday for anyone who had been at the Meriton Hotel in Waterloo from Saturday, June the 26th, right up until yesterday. That's inclusive of guests, staff and contractors, after an illegal party was held at this venue on the first few hours of lockdown. As a result, there have been 3 people affiliated with that event who have tested positive to COVID. But that's not the only incident that authorities are worried about. There was also a barbecue held at the home of the NRL player Paul Vaughan on Saturday night, involving 12 of his teammates. The NRL were tasked with investigating that incident and have issued $305,000 worth of fines to those individuals. In addition to that, they are alleging that when police arrived to investigate, some of those players actually fled the property. They're also saying that when they were questioned by the integrity unit, some of those players were withholding information, part of that investigation. Now, the NRL said that it's disappointed in that particular move, and they say generally most of their players are adhering to the rules in a bid to make sure that COVID doesn't spread.
Now, Lara, New South Wales recorded 35 new locally acquired cases on Monday. What does that mean for the scheduled end of the lockdown later in the week?
Well, it does put a cloud over when that lockdown is actually going to be lifted. So 35 yesterday, it was actually the highest number in this particular outbreak that we had seen. It had been foreshadowed by Premier Gladys Berejiklian that the figures would be bouncing around during that time. Of that 35, 33 of those cases are linked to known sources. 2 of them remain under investigation. Now, in terms of people who were in isolation, 24 of those individuals were in isolation at the time that they were infectious, and 4 of those people were in isolation for some of the time during their infectious period. The rest were out there in the community. The testing rates are up, 58,000, and in terms of the vaccination, there was a record number of vaccinations offered by New South Wales Health in the past week. 130,000. So they're the 2 main weapons in a bid to stop the spread of COVID. Whether or not those numbers go up in the coming days, that could outline when that lockdown will actually end. If the figures get worse, that could put a cloud over that.
Lara Himes in Sydney, thank you.
Let's go to Queensland, where more than 20 new venues have been added to the list of possible COVID exposure sites. Yet authorities say they're fairly comfortable with the situation.
Reporter George Roberts joins us now from Brisbane. George, good morning. So yes, despite the outbreak growing, authorities are still pretty confident.
That's right, Michael. If you look at the numbers, you'd think there'd be cause for concern. 4 new locally acquired cases added yesterday. Those 20 new sites, including places at Garden City at Mount Gravatt, Indooroopilly Shopping Centre in the city's west, as well as venues of concern in Kangaroo Point, New Farm and Forest Lake added yesterday. 20 new sites added to those exposure list. Now, people can get those on the ABC website, updated hourly if they need to check them. But those numbers are growing, and we know that the number of people put into home quarantine has grown in a staggering sense since Saturday alone. It was 2,500 people in home quarantine on Saturday. That's gone up to 4,300 as of last night. So if you look at those numbers, you'd think there's cause to be concerned, but authorities say they're not worried because they've got it under control. They have linked all of those cases. They now are pretty certain they've found the transmission site, which was a Greek takeaway restaurant at Chermside Shopping Centre that then links the cases together. The 4 new cases announced yesterday were all close contacts of existing cases, and so they say that this alpha strain, they're able to explain all those links, and so for that reason they're not particularly concerned. They're also pretty confident that the infection control measures that they've brought into place, such as mask wearing, which wasn't particularly rampant, say, a year ago. People weren't really wearing masks a year ago. Now everybody's wearing masks, as they should do, as well as the check-in app, which everybody's using to instantly check in when they arrive at a location, allows authorities to get in contact with people as soon as possible. So for those reasons, authorities are fairly confident that for now they've got this under control, and they don't think that there are any people wandering around in the community with an unexplained infection for now, Michael.
George Roberts in Brisbane, appreciate the update. Thank you.
Well, West Australians are waking up to eased restrictions this morning as the cluster of cases from Perth's northern suburbs remains at 6. But there's a new COVID case in a Perth hospital after a crew member from a bulk carrier tested positive. Evelyn Manfield has more.
So this is quite a significant easing of restrictions that's kicked in at midnight, and it'll be a big relief for businesses. The capacity's gone from 20 people up to 150. So the 20% limit that we had in for 3 days, and then the 4-day lockdown, of course, before that, meant it was really not even worth some businesses reopening. But now that that's bumped up to 150 people, we can expect to see most businesses reopen again. The stadium, that is now allowed crowds of 50% capacity, and that same rule of 50% will extend to cinemas and other sorts of venues like that. Fitness classes are also back open, so, you know, things like those CrossFit kind of workouts, as well as Pilates and yoga studios. People can come back for indoor classes as well. Now, masks are still required in lots of places, so still in the workplace and on public transport, but they don't have to be worn when you're outdoors and social distancing is possible. So these restrictions are expected to stay in place until the 12th of July. And then, if all goes to plan, there'll be quite a big easing of restrictions. Now, as all of this has happened, the WA government has announced a new COVID case, and that's a crew member off a bulk carrier in Western Australian waters. So this crew member became unwell and then was taken to hospital in Geraldton, where they were put into quarantine, and then they were flown on an aircraft yesterday into Perth. People in full PPE escorted this man off of the plane into an ambulance and into hospital in Perth. Now, government authorities say that no one else on this ship is unwell, so that's good news, and hopefully it remains the same. The ship yesterday was heading from Geraldton to off of Fremantle, a place called Gage Roads, where it was anchoring, and we'll find out what it has planned next. It's a grain ship which is due to pick up a load in Kwinana, south of Perth. But the WA government is urging federal authorities to get the ship out of Australian waters. So we'll find out more about what happens to that ship as the day unfolds.
OK, let's go to Europe now, where Boris Johnson has announced restrictions will be lifted in England later this month, and people will no longer be required to wear those face masks. Courtney Bembridge is following the story for us from London. Courtney, good morning. So Boris Johnson has presented what has to be said to be a pretty ambitious plan for Brits to essentially live with COVID.
That's right, Michael. Ambitious to some and reckless to others. This plan will involve the lifting of all legal requirements in just 2 weeks' time. That's masks, social distancing, working from home advice. It will mean that nightclubs can reopen, large sporting events can be held, and theatres can fill every seat. Of course, key to this is the vaccination effort, and as part of this, all UK adults will be offered 2 doses of the vaccine by the middle of September. But The government isn't waiting until then to lift these restrictions. They say they want to take advantage of both warmer weather and the school holidays, which will both drive down transmission rates. And there will still be some rules in place. There will be test, track and trace for those who test positive themselves, but not necessarily close contacts of positive cases if they are vaccinated. There will also be some travel restrictions from countries with high infection rates. But the opposition here says that the current plan is too ambitious and it is reckless and will lead to an increase in cases. Currently, 1 in just over 200 people are infected with coronavirus at the moment, right now. And this is only expected to increase. Cases are doubling every 9 days. And by July 19, when these new rules are set to come into force, it's expected that the UK will be recording 50,000 new cases a day.
And following on from that, how is the vaccine rollout going over there?
That's right. As I said, it is key to this. And 84% of UK adults have already had their first dose and about 64% have had their second dose. But that will, as I said, go up by mid-September, and the vaccination rate is being ramped up as we speak. Boris Johnson spoke about that earlier today.
Vaccines have helped to break the link between disease and death. And as the days have gone by, it has grown ever clearer that these vaccines are indeed successful, with the majority of those admitted to hospital unvaccinated.
What the government is looking at here is the hospitalisation rates and the death rates, and they have remained relatively steady. And a limited number of people, as the Prime Minister said there, who have been hospitalised have had both vaccinations, and the number of deaths has remained quite low. So the government says that if not now, when? Lockdown needs to lift at some point, and this is the right time to do it.
Courtney Bembridge in London, thank you.
OK, let's duck to South Australia, where tourism operators are calling for the state government to review border restrictions. They're still hoping to save some of the school holiday season. Reporter Charles Bryce is on the scene for us. Charles, what are they asking for?
Well, Lisa, tourism operators are asking for the border closures to open up as soon as possible. And they're doing so just as the school holidays are kicking off. South Australia does have closures with every state and territory except for Victoria and Tasmania, and that's having a huge impact on those tourism operators right across the state. It's come at the worst possible time, where normally we'd see families getting away and travelling right across Australia during that 2-week school break. Tourism operators in the outback SA have been some of the hardest hit. Normally they'd be having hundreds of cars travelling throughout the north of the state, travelling throughout SA, and even some cars travelling up throughout on their way to the Northern Territory. The Cooper Pedy Tourism Association have been calling on the government to ease those border closures sooner rather than later, so they can recoup some of their losses, which are no doubt running into the tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars. The State Transition Committee is meeting on Thursday to discuss whether or not the other states do have their outbreaks under control. If they deem that they do, we could see those restrictions ease quite soon, and hopefully in time for families to pack the bags and travel throughout Australia and SA during the school holidays.
Charles Bryce, thanks for the update.